It's Thursday, it's 8 o'clock, and it's the new and improved Big Detecting Show.
Fresh new look for the new year.
Happy New Year, everybody. Happy New Year, Mr. Gaylor. How are you?
Yeah, Happy New Year, everyone. I'm on the mend. I've been ill. I wasn't there last week. Everyone I know has been ill, so I don't know what was wrong, but yeah, getting better now.
And it wasn't even any of that dirty beer, because you actually slept all Christmas Day, didn't you?
Partly. The housing manager and my daughter were working Christmas Day, so there wasn't really much to do. But the day we were having Christmas, everyone was ill. I think I spent the 2 days in bed, which is unlike me, and I didn't drink much. It was not great, but I'm all right now. I got out detecting on Christmas Eve, fell asleep almost in the field. Got some good presents actually this year for Christmas, detecting presents, clothing and things. Yeah, but no, it's interesting. what this year will bring. And we've got Michael Lewis, not Martin Lewis. He's the
Not
money
Martin
saving
Lewis.
expert. No, we could do with him on because he might help.
He could possibly save us some money. We'll see. We can ask if he can save us any money. But
that'd be a show, wouldn't it? Crikey!
It
but yeah, Michael's kindly come on to the show tonight, which I think will be very interesting, and those who are new to the hobby will understand more about the Portable Antiquities Scheme and how it works. And those who've been in the hobby for a long time will no doubt have some questions about things and where it's going and what's happening, and hopefully Michael can answer those as best as he can. But yeah,
and please keep the chat nice, because well, it's not fair on the guest, it's not fair on other people who are in the chats. Let's just play nice, because there are a lot of half-wits out there who are bound to come and see Michael's on the show and try to troll the show. Let's not. Or people who want to try and get you to go to sex websites. Please don't.
No, I don't know where they came from the other week, but
probably Sri Lanka.
For a change, you've actually been detecting more than me the last few weeks, which is
yes, I have. Check my bad self out. Got me little finds here. Got nice little buckles, and there we go. Buckle on the forehead. Little thimble on the forehead.
And what else did you find, David?
A clog clasp. Beautiful nail. I love nails. Little nails, like my old nails. A ring of some variety, not a ring on your finger. Some other bits and bobs. A nice well, actually, it's not a coin because it's dried nicely now, and I can confirm, Shane, it is a jeton.
Whee, lovely.
As well, so it's just nice to be out. Oh, and a button with potentially a bit of silver gilding upon it. So
nice.
They'll all be handed over to Shane with the correct paraphernalia. And when Shane goes to visit Teresa Gilmore, the FLO at the Hanley Museum next, you can take them along with him too. So there you go.
Talking of flows quickly, and I might raise this with Michael today. Do you remember that ring I found 3 odd years ago?
Yes.
It's been released now from my coroner back to the museum, so I'm hoping to pick it up soon. So, it's all.
It'll be nice to actually see it because you've told me about it often.
Yeah, and I think the last time we spoke about it, it was on the podcast before the show went to YouTube. So I think you've only seen pictures. So yeah.
Anyway, it's with great delight that we're able to bring to you tonight Professor Michael Lewis of the British Museum and head of the Portable Antiquities Scheme. Michael, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
Well, no, thanks very much for letting me come on. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Well, I'm sure that most people are aware, the Fines Liaison Officers are obviously a part of the Portable Antiquities Scheme. And they're the persons that we, the metal detecting community, deal with first and foremost. So we're going to learn about all things to do with Portable Antiquities Scheme, Fines Liaison Officer, etc., tonight. But before we do, can you introduce yourself to let people know a little bit more about your background?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so I've been working for the Portable Antiquities Scheme since 2000, so quite a long time now. And as you kind of know, there's been a lot of changes both in the Portable Antiquities Scheme and the metal detecting hobby throughout that time. I wasn't originally an archaeologist. I kind of, when I went to universities, first off, I went to do history and theology, and then I went to the University of York to do an MA, where I studied medieval studies. So I'm kind of see myself as a medieval historian stroke archaeologist. And that was the first time really I got into archaeology, I guess. Although I had gone on a few digs sort of before that. But my first sort of museum-y job was actually at the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich, where I was in a department looking after ships' plans and historic photographs. And it was quite interesting, actually, that world, because a lot of people that I have had contact with were people like from the Admiralty who were working out how to build aircraft carriers, and they wanted to look at the plans of old ones.
Wow.
And a lot of people who made ships models as well, and they wanted the plans because they wanted to, make the exact models. Mm-hmm. Fascinating job. But that was my kind of first sort of museum job. And then And then I joined the Portable Antiquities Scheme first as the Fines Liaison Officer for Kent. So I was kind of doing the kind of frontline work that the Fines Liaison Officers do, and it was very different then, I've got to say, in 2000, going around the metal detecting clubs of Kent. And I really enjoyed that, actually. I loved going to metal detecting club meetings and meeting with finders and stuff like that. It was great. It was great fun. And then I got this job it was called Outreach Officer for the Portable Antiquities Scheme. And that was about the time that the scheme was expanding. And I know we're going to talk about that a little bit more. And then I sort of became, I suppose it was about 2003, I became the deputy head of the scheme to Roger Bland, who was the founder and head of the project. And I worked alongside him, which was great as well for many, many years until he essentially left in 2015. And then I took over as head of the scheme. So most of my archaeological life, if you like, has been with this hobby of metal detecting and kind of recording archaeological finds. And of course, I love the finds, and I think we all do, don't we?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah,
and I'm sure we'll go on to later about some of the top finds that you've actually been privy to as well.
Oh yeah, gosh, yeah.
Well, and also
that's a show in itself, no doubt.
And also some of the favourite books that metal detectorists have that you've been behind. The finds identified, for example.
Oh yeah, I saw you advertise that. That was great. I'm glad about that.
Well,
as you probably know, we're working on me and Kevin. I mean, I've got to say, Kevin is the guy who's really at the forefront of producing those. I kind of help him out really. He tells me what to do really, but we put our minds together, of course. And it's it's a collaborative project. But without Kevin, it would never happen. But he and me are working on a third volume at the moment, which hopefully will be ready by the end of the year. But to that.
There you go. People can get that on the Christmas list already.
Yeah, and the other books have done really well. I mean, I think you'll know Adrian, but I mean, I think Treasure Hunting's been really pleased with the success of those, and I'm really pleased with the reviews. And it's great that seeing so many people, not only in this country but in other countries as well, who kind of love the books and love looking at all the finds. Of course, it replicates in many ways what's on the database, but we add kind of more information to that. But I think people still like books, don't they? Even though we're used to this online world.
Yeah, it's funny. I was reading an article last year about print production on books, especially detailed hobbyist books. It has actually gone up for the first time in 7 or 8 years. And I think COVID's had something to do with that, because a lot of people, especially in our hobby, I've said this before, will find a coin or an artifact, post it on a forum, whatever, for Facebook or some sort of site, and someone will come along and say, oh no, that's blah blah, and they'll go, oh, never mind, and it isn't, they've got it wrong. But a book goes through, well, a hell of a lot of processes, the photography, the copywriting, the dates, and once that's printed, that's got to be right. So if you need to reference stuff, books are absolutely key. And it is so nice in this day and age to put your phone down, shut down your laptop and open a book and just lose yourself in it. And the finds identified books, I mean, the reviews on them are from all over the world are phenomenal, and the illustrations and the content, and they're just such nice books. They're like a coffee table book. And I have them obviously at home, and when people come round, what's that then? And they're literally engrossed in it, going through the book, because of the history and the hobby. Look there, Dave's got one there. Identified too.
I've got them all next to me.
Can we have a secret snippet of what 3 might contain?
Yeah, well, Kevin Leahy, as you may know, he knows a lot about how things were made. So that's the sort of angle about, how were they making these things? And so it kind of explores the kind of background to metal making and glass making and pottery making in a way. But it's kind of trying to explore how they produce these objects and how that changed in different periods. So there's going to be loads of images like there always is, but the kind of, as you know, the first one was quite a general sort of guide to everything. The second one, we focused very much on sort of dress accessories. And this one is a bit about how things are made and manufactured, really. So, I mean, I've found, reading what Kevin's done already, because he's done a load of work on it, reading what he's done, absolutely fascinating. There's loads of things that I've just kind of think, oh my gosh, I didn't know about that, or you don't really think about it. But I mean, of course, people just like seeing the other objects as well. And it's probably really important I say that obviously all of the images that are taken are essentially those that are taken by the fines liaison officers across the country. And those standards of reproducing images has improved significantly over the time I've been in with the scheme. I remember going to metal detecting clubs in Kent and trying to take photographs of objects kind of in the kind of club meetings on an SLR camera, and then coming back, and then hardly anything looks kind of right in the all blurred and all that sort of stuff. It was a nightmare. So now with digital photography, obviously it's a lot easier to get better images than we ever did. But yeah, I mean, when the images are really good, it really makes a difference, doesn't it, in terms of these books? Of course.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, it's funny. You go through the PAS website back to 10, 15 years ago stuff, and it was okay, but you can tell it was taken on a very early digital camera, and there's sort of like it's oversaturated and stuff. But the ones today are fantastic, really, really good. Which brings me on to the PAS whole thing. I don't know if you want to, like you said, it could be a long-winded thing, but if you want to sort of quickly, because it's been going a few years, explain how it was set about and how it's evolved.
Okay, so I mean, really, I mean, as I kind of alluded earlier, it's the brainchild of my predecessor, Roger Bland, who essentially is a kind of, he was interested in Roman coins, and he was there was a kind of a sort of long kind of backstory to kind of the reform of treasure, but essentially the government came to the view that it wanted to change the treasure legislation in terms of making it a bit more clearer in terms of what is treasure. I mean, I think if you remember with Treasure Trove, things had to sort of be buried with the intention of recovery. And, there's lots of discussions about whether an object, was buried with intention or not. I mean, how do you know the mindsets of these people, many, many years ago? So the idea was to make the law clearer, really. So that was the reform of treasure, which happened in sort of 1996. And then the law came in 1997. At the same time, though, when they were kind of consulting about it, people were saying, well, it's fine, playing with the law of treasure, but that is so focused on gold and silver objects. What about everything else that everyone finds, the detecting community in particular? And it was thought that it would be a good idea to kind of set up pilot schemes to kind of encourage the voluntary recording of archaeological finds that are outside the Act. And obviously, a lot of archaeologists were, welcome that idea that there was going to be liaison with the detecting community, because I think, you probably all remember, 20 odd years ago, the kind of relations between metal detectists and archaeologists was awful. And there was obviously in the 1980s even a campaign by the Council for British Archaeology to have metal detecting banned. It was called the Stop campaign, Stop Taking Our Past campaign, it was called. And I think in those early days, those discussions between archaeologists and detectorists kind of led to a lot of common understanding that actually, detectorists aren't out there looting, as archaeologists were kind of portraying it, and archaeologists weren't out there wanting to ban the hobby of metal detecting. Essentially, we had a common interest, which was the objects that were found, and everybody wanted to learn more about them. So essentially, the scheme was set up as pilot projects in 1997 to encourage that kind of voluntary recording. And then in 2003, when I was then involved with the scheme, we got Heritage Lottery Fund money for 3 years to expand the scheme to the whole of England and Wales. And that was the first time that we had fines liaison officers everywhere across the country. And of course, as you all know, the number of objects that were recorded has just rocketed over that time, from a few thousand, I suppose it was in the first few years of the scheme, to what we record now is like between 50 and 60,000 objects a year, which is a terrific number. But, obviously a lot more being found, which is one of the kind of problems that no doubt we'll kind of talk about. But yeah, so I mean, we've been on a massive journey. I mean, I think to start with, like I said, when I was a fines liaison officer in Kent, it was very much about trying to build those relationships between the archaeological and metal detecting communities. But now, of course, there's just so many people wanting to engage with us and record finds, and it's obviously brilliant that so many people are doing that. But obviously, we're kind of limited in the resources that we've got to do that work as well. So, we're now thinking about, how do we deal with that? What are the best ways to deal with that? And the PAS website, of course, is one of the main ways in which we make this information available. And luckily, in the last spending review, the government's given us monies to rebuild the PAS database to make it even more better than it is, really. And I think there's lots of opportunities for using digital technology to make it easier, perhaps, for people to record fines. But
yeah,
talk about that a bit more.
It's interesting because the original PAS website, when it was first launched, was quite revolutionary and had a lot of comments from people all over the world, which I think there is an area on it. The way it integrated with APIs in certain things. And what I didn't realise till last year was that site, with all that integration, servers included, was done for £10,000. Which,
yeah, well, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know exactly what the costs were. So when we put in the Heritage Lottery Fund bid, there was money to build a website. I remember the days when we did have a website where we had the data, where the individual fines liaison officers, and I was one of them, every year we were working on our own kind of personal computers, if you like, with the data, a replica database. And we would then physically send data files to a central place in London where they're all combined across the country and stuck on a single database, like once or twice a year. It was nothing really. And then in 2003, we were able to make this kind of new website, which was obviously the costs of it were, obviously we're talking about a different period now, but the costs were a lot less. But we did have people, my colleague Dan Pett, who worked for the Portable Antiquities Scheme for a long time, he obviously did a lot of research and was able to add a lot of things himself to the database to make it as cheap as possible, but actually make use of a lot of the kind of resources that are available to make it as interactive as possible, really. So now looking at it, of course, it looks quite dated, and in some ways we've got all of these other kind of recording schemes in other parts of Europe that are being established. So, for example, in Denmark and in the Netherlands in particular. And when you look at their technology, I'm quite jealous, really, of what they've got compared with what we have, because obviously they've developed those in the last kind of 5 or 10 years. But the challenge, of course, is that technology changes so quickly, doesn't it? So you can build something and then like 5 years later, it just seems a bit kind of dated, doesn't it? So how do you kind of create that longevity as well to things? That's the other challenge.
Well, and there's security as well nowadays, which is always an issue. But we've seen the Just Detect app, which was launched a year or two ago. The NCMD have got their fines recording app now. And I think the self-recording potentially could be looked at, made easier. More consistent. Is it the same for self-recording in every part of the country, or is it slightly different?
Yeah, so basically with the database, the kind of the thing we always have to kind of be mindful of is that the reason the PAS sort of exists is because we create really good data that is then used for sort of archaeological projects and archaeological research. There's lots of people. Nowadays in British archaeology, I would say it's impossible to do meaningful archaeological projects, landscape projects, without considering Portable Antiquities Scheme data. You can't ignore detector finds, essentially. It's become so embedded in understanding kind of British landscape archaeology. It's just such an important place, and that's thanks to the collaboration essentially between metal detectorists and archaeologists, that sort of vision. In terms of the sort of self-recording, essentially we had a project again funded by the Heritage Lottery Fund over 3 years, which was designed to kind of give people who wanted to volunteer with the scheme, both metal detectorists and non-detectorists, the sort of skills they need to kind of put things onto the database, because the database is not simply just take a photograph and a few dimensions and just sort of load it up. As you know, the kind of the the free text kind of aspects of it require kind of quite a bit of thought and stuff like that. And obviously some people can't be bothered to do all of that stuff. And then other people are quite into it as well. So it's getting the right sort of people. But we've been really lucky that there's been, quite a few detectorists that have wanted to be self-recorders, i.e. that they record their own fines directly onto the database. But obviously they have to be trained like PAS staff do. I mean, it's not the case that with fines liaison officers either, that, they can have never had anything to do with the Portable Antiquities Scheme, rock up to work and then start banging things onto the database. It takes time to be able to do it. Now, the challenge, of course, going forward is how do we make that simplified? And the Dutch system is quite an interesting one, because what they've done is they've come up with object classification types. And the idea is that you then you link a find that you've got. You say, I think it's one of these. It's like a visual sort of reference guide. And you link it to that, and then it's uploaded. The reason they did that is because in the Netherlands, there's a legal requirement to report your discoveries. So they had to have a reporting aspect. And then the recording kind of builds onto that. But I suppose what I'm saying really is reporting things is one thing, but making a good record out of that is the other one. And, we've had a lot of conversations with the National Council for Metal Detecting and the Association of Metal Detecting Sports in terms of ideas about how do we kind of do that? How do we get from one place, to the other, really? Because it is so important that the information, as you said, in terms of the books is right, isn't it? I mean, it's the basis of what is happening in terms of the research from those finds.
Yeah, and I think also with the hobby in the last 20 years, historically, 20 years ago, it was a guy or a woman in their late 60s who probably had a flip phone, not a smartphone, had a computer at home, but only used it because it was connected to the fax. And in the last 5 or recent years, the hobby's introduced a lot more younger people, a lot more people willing to use social media with apps on their phones, and that's the way they work. So the days of filling out a form and taking a photo on a slide and getting it processed is gone. And the demographics in the hobby, people are a little bit more switched on. People are watching this show, they've got their laptop, they've managed to click the link, they've subscribed or whatever. Because one of the things I struggle with personally in recording my finds is I have a full-time job. So I have to take time off work, drive 30 miles to my nearest flow and complete the form. Now, I know what is potentially treasure and I know the law behind it, but there are artifacts that I want to get registered, but I physically haven't got the time to do it. Yeah. And me personally, in the last 3 years, there's 3 flows have been in Essex, if you obviously know, have gone. Oh, yeah. And the assistant's now gone as well. So I'm currently waiting on the update of a find ring, bishop's ring I found 3.5 years ago. That went to my coroner. I phoned the coroner up last week and they said, it went back to the museum months ago. Now, now I know I understand people are leaving, but it's almost as if not only is the fines recording process need looking at, but also this, in modern day language, the CRM system, the customer relationship management. So if someone does leave or hands a job over, there's a whole log or a record of what's been going on, where it's been, and stuff, so someone can quickly pick it up. Or a simple out of office on email. So rather than, I sent 27 emails in the last 3 years and probably only had 4 replies. Now, That's not down to the system. That's probably down to because the person's left or moved on. But little things like that. And in my head, the way I envisage it is there's a portal. You upload your images or your copy, information, location, etc. And there's almost an online database that the flows can share the work from. And there's a little status on there saying it's been assigned, it's in progress, and it can be collected or it's finished. Do you know what I mean? Something simple, because then you're removing the emailing, the phone calls, because we all know emails and phone calls take lots of time. And if you get an email, you want to respond to it as quick as you can, but sometimes you can't. So it's almost like it's almost like a returns sort of website for clothing. You upload you post your parcel off and then you log back on a day later or you get an email saying, just to confirm this has been, and I just think in the modern day, we have technology, we have computers, we can all sit at home on our laptops at night and do things. But when it comes to physically getting in a car, driving to your flow, I think I'm interested. I know a few people have raised that in the past with me who've got similar issues, but I think it would help the flows. But again, it's building the right platform that ticks all the boxes. And at the end of the day, it all boils down to cost.
What you mentioned, Adrian, about sending 27 emails in 3 years. There's 40,000 metal detectorists in the UK, for instance, sending 27 emails over 3 years.
I mean, if that was an office,
the fines liaison officers aren't being able to get back to you.
Well, I'm a bit disappointed to hear that you're not getting sort of responses. But I mean, there's two things I kind of want to kind of talk about in relation to that. I mean, one is, I suppose, that it's quite important to distinguish between the treasure process and the other sort of fines that the fines liaison officers deal with. So in terms of the treasure process, obviously there's elements of that where the fines liaison officer is directly involved, and then it moves on to other people depending on where it is in the process. So, for people who are not sort of familiar with it, essentially what happens to start with is a report is written on the find for the coroner. That can be the database reports. So in some ways, fines liaison officers are dealing with those objects pretty much like any other sort of fines as well. If they're going to, if no museum is interested in those objects, then essentially they're disclaimed and they're returned to finder. And in fact, I've been doing a little bit of work with one of my colleagues in the treasure team to kind of look at what has happened to those objects to get some sort of data on terms of what happens to these objects. But in terms of disclaims, even for the last year that's just gone, well over half of them were kind of dealt with. So basically returned to finder since they're reported within 3 months. So that's really quick, actually, because the treasure process assumes that things should take no more than a year unless there's complicating factors relating to them, which is normally something like it's a large hoard or it's a complicated find in terms of understanding it or researching it, those sorts of things. After that, of course, it depends on how quickly coroners can deal with them, how quickly museums can raise money to acquire those objects and sort of pay them back. So it's kind of all I would suggest to people is if they can't get a hold of their fines liaison officer, which I think they should be able to, but if they can't, they definitely come to me or my colleagues in the treasure team at the British Museum, and we'll be able to sort of chase with treasure. But a positive kind of story that I've got, because I mentioned in terms of the Department of Culture, Media and Sport supporting the Portable Antiquities Scheme and the rebuilding of the database, we're looking to introduce a treasure tracking system. So the idea is that, like you suggest, there's a lot of toing and froing with people contacting their fines liaison officer and asking for an update. And it might be that the fines liaison officer doesn't know because it's past them in the process and they have to talk to someone at the British Museum or even the coroner or whatever it might be. There's all of these different sorts of things potentially going on. The idea is that it would be a bit like following your parcel in a way, that you kind of follow your fine through the process. So now, of course, at different stages in the process, you're supposed to get a letter or an email saying it's now got to the next sort of stage, if you like. But the idea of trying to automate that would be, a really positive thing, and it would save us all, both from the detecting community, but also us that sort of administer the aspects. It'd save a lot of time. The second, in terms of the everyday other sorts of fines, you're right. Obviously, fines liaison officers get a lot of emails, and it's sometimes possible to things get missed. And obviously, like you say, in Essex, there's been a turnover of staff. But nonetheless, Philip Wise, who kind of manages, if you like, the fines liaison officers, he's been there for donkey's years. So he should be a sort of point that can at least kind of tell people, sort of where things are. But like I said, if anybody has any kind of issues with any cases, they're very welcome to contact me directly. I've asked the Association for Metal Detecting Sport, Treasure Hunting Magazine, the Searcher Magazine, and the National Council of Metal Detecting, all to put up a kind of note that I'd kind of produced, asking people, what they should expect from the PAS, and then what they get back. The second thing I was going to say, sorry, I know I'm talking a lot. The second thing I was going to say, in terms of in terms of the kind of relationship, if you like, with the Portable Antiquities Scheme. I know this kind of goes back to what you were saying about how the hobby has sort of changed over time. I mean, I sort of remember when I was in Kent, we were sort of almost begging detectorists to kind of show us their stuff. And now, of course, it's the other way around. That we've got like, right, I've given you my find, I want it back now. And it is that sort of, it seems to be that we've kind of developed that kind of customer-consumer sort of relationship. But in my view, it shouldn't really be about that, because what I think we should be doing is, we within the archaeological fraternity and you in the metal detecting fraternity should be seeing like, how do we work together? Because essentially what we want to do, isn't it, is demonstrate the value of metal detecting to contribute to archaeological knowledge and the history of this country. That's the sort of objective. And we should be kind of working together as a partnership to think, well, how do we do that? And what are the challenges? But essentially, I think the biggest problem is that we need really robust data, and it takes time to produce that, unfortunately. And we either have to find lots of different ways to involve people within the community. So on the continent, they call this citizen science, essentially, in terms of metal detecting, where it seems a really positive thing, where you've got people contributing to science as is in archaeology in this way. So I think, what I want to do is have there to be more closer sort of collaboration, and I want to work with the detecting community to think about, well, how do we maximise the number of objects that we record, but also how do we ensure that record is as robust and as useful as possible as well. And they are the two main things, really. I mean, in some ways, what the PAS is a really simple thing. It's just a mechanism to ensure that metal detecting finds can add to archaeological knowledge, really.
And obviously, the easier you make it, the more likelihood you've got people of submitting their finds. Because some people may, we hope that everyone does, but some people don't, purely because you might have to take a day off work, and if you're self-employed, you'll lose pay, and then you've got to take another day off work to collect your fines and stuff like that. So the easier the process is made, it will probably generate more work. But then if you're more smarter and efficient in processing that data, it will make things easier. But I think that's one of the other problems we got. We've all seen it in the PAS report, which you were responsible for putting together, which was in Treasure Hunting magazine, Michael. It's just getting silly, the stuff that's coming up the last few years. And since lockdown, more and more people are taking on the hobby. Metal detector sales are, going through the roof. A lot of people can't find land to detect on anymore, but a lot of stuff is coming up. And the more stuff that comes up, the more people are reporting, and that gives you more work.
Yeah. It's great. It's great in many ways. It's kind of like it sounds like it's a negative, the fact that we've got so much stuff and how do we deal with it? But it's brilliant in many respects, isn't it? That so many people want to contribute. But we're obviously having to find new ways of doing that. I mean, I completely take the point, and other detectorists have said this to me as well, is that obviously most people would rather spend their hobby time out sort of metal detecting or doing other things that they want to do. And the finds recording side, although most people recognize is really important, the ability to kind of deal with that as easy as possible is obviously something is what people want to do. It is inevitable that finds liaison officers do want to spend time looking at the objects, and there's obviously stuff that detectorists find that are quite common and can perhaps be recorded in a different way, and there might be digital techniques that allow that to happen. So one thing I'm quite keen on is sort of triaging the data somehow. And the way I see it is there's stuff obviously we don't want to record because we think it doesn't really add to knowledge. There's stuff that's quite common, which is probably the most of it, which there's obviously a lot of people within the detecting world who are really experienced at seeing these objects and they know what they are. So it's how do we just ensure that we get good grid references and good images that can help create those records. And then there's obviously objects, that the finds liaison officers really do need to see in the person to kind of properly understand. And that does, of course, mean that objects have to go from A to B and all of that sort of stuff. But it has been, like the self-recording, although it's, you know, a small percentage, of course, of finders, you know, when you've got someone who really knows what they're doing, has been sort of trained to use the Portable Antiquities Scheme database, and I'm not talking about it in terms of, you know, everyone has to be trained to use it. You know, it's not just detectives, if you like. It's everyone who uses that database has to be trained. But once they're up and running and they're kind of really into it, if you like, I mean, that contribution is massive. I think I've just been putting the stats for the next annual report together because I kind of compile them at the beginning of the year, and I can't remember what it is, but it's like a couple of thousand objects at least have been recorded by, you know, the detectorists themselves, about 100 of them, I think, detectorists. So it's, you know, it's great that people are doing that and helping it. But some people don't want to do that, and that's fine. And, you know, maybe there's other mechanisms. One thing I think we haven't really explored a lot, actually, is there's a lot of people who are, say, you know, retired archaeologists or just interested in finds sort of stuff. And could they sort of partner with detectorists, you know, to help record their finds on their behalf? Because, you know, we get some metal detecting clubs, don't you, where you've got kind of club recorders who start kind of helping their mates out in terms of recording stuff. I mean, I think we could have more of those sorts of relationships, really, of people kind of working together to try and get those finds recorded in different ways. But I don't think one thing's going to work for everything. That's the point. Everyone's different, aren't they? And I mean, some people are going to be really quite geographically close to their finds and also probably find it quite easy to hand in stuff. Other people, like you say, are going to have to make quite long distances, and it's quite inconvenient. So they might need to have a different route to record their finds. But essentially, we just find as many ways as possible to record as much stuff as possible, really.
Did you? I don't know if we went over this, but if I'm watching the show tonight and I've had a metal detector for a year and I haven't found anything of much significance, and I go out tomorrow and I find 4 gold nobles, and I go to my flow and would you mind just explaining for those who are unaware of the process, because I very much doubt people Google it until the time happens. Well, I was fortunate to know the process, so when I found stuff, it's been quite simple. But for someone new to the hobby, would you mind just quickly explaining, the minute they find that treasure and they contact their flow, what exactly happens once they meet their flow?
Okay, so I mean, I suppose the simplest thing really is that if people are able to show their finds liaison officer what they find all the time, then they can guide them in terms of whether there's something that's treasure or not. But essentially, in terms of the treasure process itself, you know, the legal process by which people do have to report objects, the law says that a finder has to report it within 14 days of finding it or realizing that it's treasure. And the realizing is quite an important thing, because the law kind of allows the possibility that people don't know, you know, might be new to the hobby and they might not realize what they've done. And it's not there to kind of catch people out. It's to try and encourage them to do the right thing, essentially. So then what will happen is they should contact their finds liaison officer, and the finds liaison officer will arrange with them to kind of hand over the object so it can go through the next stages of the treasure process. Now, during lockdown, it was actually the case that sometimes we didn't actually ask things to come in. It was you know, if we didn't think a museum was very likely to acquire it, then that was one of the routes that we sort of could do, or they would hold on to it until we could sort of meet with them. But according, you know, although the legislation says that you have to report it to the coroner in the district in which it was found, the chief coroner has produced guidance to basically say that they feel that the finder will have executed their duty by telling the local finds liaison officer. So that's in effect the kind of legal requirement done. It's then up to the coroner in a way to direct where that object is deposited, but in practice, it's down to the finder just meeting up with the finds liaison officer and handing those objects. The role of the finds liaison officer then is simply to produce a report on the find. Sometimes they're not able to because it's an object that is quite different to what they're used to dealing with, or there might be a specialist who's better at dealing with that. And then the object may come to the British Museum if it was found in England, for one of the curators at the British Museum to write the report. But in most cases, that report for the coroner is written by the finds liaison officer. Then what happens is the local fines liaison officer will ask any local museum that are interested in acquiring this object. So it's normally down to the fines liaison officer to do that. If they don't, then essentially there's a request made to the coroner to return that object to the finder and landowner as saying that the Crown is not interested in that object. But if a museum does want to acquire it, then what happens is it kind of kicks into the sort of next stage of the process, whereby the coroner holds an inquest to formally declare whether the find is treasure or not. And obviously it's up to the coroner to decide whether an object is treasure. I mean, we might think it is, the finder might think it is, and that is it might be what the report says, this is treasure because of X, Y, and Z. But it's at the end of the day, it's down to the coroner to decide whether it's treasure or not. And generally they agree, but sometimes they don't. And if they agree, then it's really down to the local museum who's expressed the interest to kind of raise the money to acquire the find. Now, the value is determined by an independent committee called the Treasure Valuation Committee, and they have a finder's representative on that committee besides people from the trade and others. Reports are normally commissioned for those fines from independent valuers in the trade. And if the finder or the landowner or the museum or any other interested party thinks that value isn't right, they can provide evidence to demonstrate why not. The committee considers that, and then it makes a recommendation to the Secretary of State. So it goes quite high up government in a funny sort of way. And it's really down to the Secretary of State to decide whether that reward is payable to the finder. It sounds, for some people, it sounds like a sort of, the museum is buying their object. And that's how sometimes finders talk about it. But actually, what is happening is the Crown is saying this is the property of the Crown, and we're giving a reward to the finder equal, and the landowner, equal to the value of what the object would be worth if it was to be sold on the open market. So it's quite a complicated process. And as you can tell from that, there's no surprise, is there, that at different stages, someone will not be quite up to speed with what they're sort of supposed to do, or it gets overtaken by something else.
You're right, and I forgot to mention that with my find with the coroner retired, so they had to find a new coroner, and this was during COVID. And luckily, I don't know if you're aware, Essex County Council now have taken someone on who specifically deals with treasure, which is great, because I think we've just gone through COVID, where there's sadly been a lot of deaths, so the coroner's been very busy. And at the same time, there's treasure mounting up. So it would be good if each council had a specific person who specialises in treasure, because it's such the coroner does so many different roles, don't they? But again, it's another process.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, as you know, there's some parts of the country where, especially in East Anglia, where there's lots of treasure finds being found, all the time, and the eastern part of the country as well, and the southeast as well to some extent. And coroners, obviously treasure is a small part of their workload. And they deal with it in quite different ways. And we can't tell coroners what to do, of course. They're removed from us. So some of them will kind of build up batches and deal with them in one go. Some of them, in some parts of the country, even say that they have to have most of them deal with them by paper inquest. So they're basically saying that we can deal with it in our offices, if you like. We don't need to call witnesses and all that sort of stuff. But some of them actually do that. They like the idea that because it's a court, essentially. I've gone to coroner's court before, and the coroner wants to hear from me about an object and why it's important. And then they decide, yes, I think it's treasure on the balance of what I've been told from all the witnesses and stuff like that. So it can be kind of, a bit heavier than you might think. And then some coroners obviously there was a time when in Oxfordshire during the Iraq War that the coroner was dealing with so many death inquests that they just didn't have time to do treasure. So you can see how things in terms of the treasure process kind of get put to the back if it's that sort of stuff, really.
Yeah, no, it's thanks for going through that. I think some people have said in the chat about that it's interesting to understand when they do eventually find treasure, what they should do, because I think with the hobby growing.
What's treasure, Adrian?
Yeah, no, Dave, you find it, but it's normally got a lot of sugar in it and chocolate and dough or pastry. Sorry, Dave likes cake. But yeah, it's something which with the hobby potentially in time, I think, you buy a metal detector, and I know some dealers and distributors do put leaflets in boxes telling them about the Treasure Act and the code, what they should be doing. But I think once you get the new website live and things, it will hopefully encourage the younger generation and more mature people like me and Dave into realizing this is really the way we should be working, rather than I can recall going into people's houses 10, 15, 20 years ago who were metal detectorists, never recorded anything. And there's just biscuit tins on biscuit tins of stuff, which is absolutely amazing. And that you sort of say to the family, luckily, oh, this is interesting, we can declare this. But how many biscuit tins of fines are going to be put at a jumble sale and someone's going to say it's a load of old tat and chuck it in the bin? This is... I think that's more in the past, but going forward, it is very, very important. And I think the more people who do record stuff, and the easier it is to record, and the easier it is to record digitally rather than bits of paper and stuff like that, the easier it is to do reports for you and everyone else and monitor the process.
I think we are, like you said, we're in a world now where the technology is moving quite fast and allowing us to do things that we weren't able to do like 10, 15 years ago. And, I'm very keen that the scheme makes as much use of those things. I mean, there's obviously going to be always people that don't use that technology, and we have to be able to accommodate that as well. But like I said, in terms of the treasure tracking system, something that would, alert finders to where things are in the process and keep them updated. Because I think, obviously, we get quite a few people at the, in the treasure team at the British Museum, we get people kind of contacting us, wanting to know where their finds are in the process and why it's taken so long. And, once you have a conversation with them, most of the people kind of understand that. Okay, I found, 50 coins and something, and have to go to conservation, someone has to do some work on them, and that's going to take time. It's not something that happens just overnight. So some of those things, so once you kind of explain those processes to people, they understand. And of course, like you said as well, there's a lot of people that are putting things into the process. So last year was a sort of bumper year for treasure in England. We had nearly 1,300 cases go through. And, they have to go through this, fairly bureaucratic process. Whereas we recorded over 50,000 fines as well, which, they don't go through the same sort of processes. But they all are in the mix, aren't they? They're what the fines liaison officers have to deal with, this kind of quite large quantity of objects.
Are you finding it hard to recruit fines liaison officers?
Why'd you say that? Are you gonna...
It's not. If you love history and the hobby, it's a great job, and I'd love to do it, but unfortunately it's not a lot of money. No. So it's a very hard thing to sort of, I can't recall when I was at school the careers officer saying, who wants to be a fines liaison officer?
No, well, I suppose, did they?
They didn't. No. Well, I'm only 30, so they might have done. But yeah, it must be challenging for yourselves as well to sort of keep these people in positions and also find new people to take on this role.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm doing the interviews for the Essex Fines Liaison Officer on Monday, actually. So you'll soon have a new Fines Liaison Officer, hopefully. Yeah, it's interesting because people come from. I mean, obviously, most people who apply for these jobs have done an archaeology degree or something sort of similar, and the people, but their background and their experiences is quite varied actually within archaeology. So, when we're doing interviews, we do tend to get a lot of people who are kind of coming from field archaeology who are probably not that familiar with finds. There's people who have done work at university on finds and coming in that sort of way. But as you say, I mean, archaeology isn't a very well-paid job. The fines liaison officers, I suppose it's. You probably need to speak to fines liaison officers about what they sort of, feel about the job. I think it does have kind of pressures particularly because people are kind of sort of wanting information on their, they have to deal with a lot of inquiries. I mean, I can only really talk from my perspective of doing the job when I was in Kent. I mean, there were some people that I used to meet who were, really nice and really understanding and wanting to help me out as much as they could in lots of different ways. And there's obviously people, who were kind of more complicated, if you like, and would get kind of quite argumentative and annoyed about things. And sometimes you had control over those, and sometimes you didn't. So I think there's kind of a lot of pressures to the job. In a different way, but obviously it's an amazing job at the same time, because you are the first person to see these objects, and I think that's what people do the job for. Two main reasons, I think. One is because they love working with archaeological finds, or they get to love working with archaeological finds, or they like working with people. And obviously the ideal finds liaison officer is someone who has both of those sorts of skills. But I mean, it's always the case that none of us are the same, and some of us warm to some people rather than others, and some finds types more than others as well. So it's difficult to be the same, if you like, person in every place. You can't clone people to be different. I mean, I was not really that much interested in kind of Roman material. So when people kind of showed me all these Roman coins in Kent, I was a bit, oh gosh, not another one. But when it was medieval stuff, I was getting quite excited about it. But you get someone else there, and it'd be completely the other, wouldn't it? So.
Do you know, Michael? We were looking at evolving the big detecting show somewhat. We've had a number of ideas that we've been playing with behind the scenes. Adrian, myself, Luke, Shane, and Kerry from the Lost Tapes of History podcast, and something that I'll email you that might interest you, that we want to develop within the show. I think might help a little bit in the short term anyway. So
I don't even know that. I can't remember.
Hopefully that's something that we would like to look at rolling out this year. So we will contact you probably tomorrow, after the show, what have you, tomorrow, and we'll put that to you. But in the short term, it might assist the process somewhat. You like that?
Yeah, good, excellent.
Adrian, I bet let you know as well.
Yeah, you better tell me. Michael, just quickly, Andy Agate, he's just commented, be in the flow is a great job, lots of pressure, but I meet lots of people and amazing finds. So, it's nice to hear that. Thanks, Andy. And, at the end of the day, metal detectorists, you can talk to someone who's never had a job, got a disability, can't work, and they detect all the time. And another time, I'll talk to someone who's got a multi-million-pound business in e-commerce or something, and they're detecting. And then next time you turn around, there's a bricklayer. It's such a random hobby, more than ever before, I think. A lot more since COVID, especially the mental health side of things.
And children, Adrian, how many children are involved now?
Yeah,
my 10-year-old son.
Yeah, women. I'm seeing a lot more women. And something Mackenzie Crook said from the Detectorists in a promo for his publication his company did a month ago. We're British and we love hobbies. We love hobbies.
Yeah,
Sundays, since growing up from a kid in the late 70s, Sundays, your mum and dad would cut the lawn. They'd paint the front door step. They'd trim the garden hedge. They'd prune the roses. They'd, all day they'd work really hard and sit down at sort of 5 o'clock, have trifle and sprats and whatever for tea and watch the Antiques Roadshow. You go to Spain and Europe, they're all just sitting there drinking beer and, having meals. And it's the English, I think I'll change the suspension on the car this weekend. Oh, I'll go metal detecting. It is a very British thing, hobbies, and metal detecting, fishing. It's something which I think the English are specifically targeted to, and I think it's only going to grow. I think and metal detecting now is becoming more affordable, and with the new machines getting more and more powerful, the GPS tracking on there, software updates. So, you buy a detector now and it can be a load of rubbish when it's new, which some have been. And then within a couple of weeks, you get a software update and it makes it brilliant. And then it makes it even more powerful.
I can't find treasure.
No, but that's because of where you live, Dave. And you have bad beer. But yeah, sorry. We did have some questions. Sorry.
We have got some
from
questions. Shane's
Paul
been
B.
nice
got
enough
one.
to send them on inbox. He's been Staffordshire Searcher. The first one was from Stephen Brain, which has been answered by Andy at Gates. He wants to know, he has take a photo of his first item for the Portable Antiquities Scheme for his FLO. What is the best way to do this? So Andy's basically said, get in contact with your FLO and ask them what would be the best way to do it. But as we've spoke about, digital mobile phones and such like now are so good that images are taken are profoundly better than they were in the past. Philip Wills asks, are there any plans for extra FLOs with the funding and whatnot?
Yeah, so we were really lucky in the last spending review that we got extra money from the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport to have extra sort of staff. So we've got 40 fines liaison officers now across the country. But with the money, we've been able to get assistants, fines liaison officer assistants, working alongside fines liaison officers in, I think it's about 10 areas, something like that, which has been great. And obviously that's going to help the fines liaison officers deal with some of those workloads. And going back to what you were saying before, Adrian, about kind of who would do this job. I mean, obviously, doing a fines liaison officer job from nothing or from no fines experience, if you like, or from coming from university or something, it's quite a big jump. And we found now a lot of fines liaison officers have tended to be assistants or volunteers or something like that beforehand to sort of know whether they like doing it and spending all day recording fines and working with the detecting community and other people. So so a lot of those assistants, hopefully, they'll be having time doing the job and seeing whether they like it, and then they can obviously be able to apply for jobs that sort of come up in different parts of the country. I mean, it's a job, I think, some people obviously have done it for a very long time. We've got a lot of people within the scheme that have been there for years and years and years, and then there's obviously people that do it for a few years and then they kind of move on. So sometimes people see it as a stepping stone, I suppose, within their kind of archaeological type heritage career. And personally, from my perspective, I think that's great. I mean, there's so many people now that I've kind of come into contact with who were once fines liaison officers and now are kind of like managing museums or archaeological projects and all that sort of stuff. I mean, it's good news, isn't it, when you've got people who are kind of, I suppose, brought up with, the Portable Antiquities Scheme and working with kind of finders, that they kind of, they take that onto their other sorts of job. I mean, it's a good thing, really.
Yeah, definitely. I suppose the issue you've got is, as years go, in 20 years' time, you want to ensure that there's people still interested in history, willing to take on that next step. It's like a lot of things, business.
I don't see the end of that, though. I don't think. I mean, every year I give talks to archaeological students at different universities in the country, and there's loads of. I mean, they haven't really thought much about what they're going to do. They might not even do archaeology after doing an archaeological degree. Of course, they might suddenly think we want something a bit better paid than this. But I think there's going to be loads of people that want to kind of do this sort of work, working with fines. Thing is, it's not really taught in university. Working with fines. They taught a lot of the principles of archaeology, but spending time with objects is something. I mean, it's the same with detectorists, isn't it? Of course, you start the hobby and you're finding things, you've got no idea what they are, and then gradually you get familiar with another one of them and another one of them, and I know what that is. I've seen one of those. It's just the time spent with the objects that builds that knowledge, isn't it? Really.
Yeah, and get the books, buy the books.
Available at detectingmedia.co.uk
and many other outlets. But yeah, I think it's. I did have another question actually. Did you have some more, Dave? And there's
Paul B asks if it's not been covered already. Can the process with detectorists be regarded as just a form of citizen science, or has it more value for the British Museum?
Oh, that's kind of
that one.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So, I mean, it is in, like I said, in a lot of European countries, they talk about the engagement, if you like, with detectorists and other people as a citizen science, project, if you like. I mean, for me, it's kind of quite simple in a way. Is that there's not a mechanism apart from the Portable Antiquities Scheme to ensure that these objects are made available for archaeological sort of works and research. And that's the key thing for me, is that we're not recording these things for the fun of it. And likewise, anyone can have a place, I suppose, that they post images of the finds and say, I found this, that anyone can do that all of the time. What we're trying to do is do something bigger than that. We're trying to change, essentially, our understanding of the history of this country by recording these objects. And the detectorists, like I said, I was going through the annual report figures for last year. 90% of the finds are found by metal detectorists. We record finds found by anyone who is not an archaeologist, essentially, because obviously archaeological finds should be written up in a proper way and published anyway. It was always the case that detector finds didn't necessarily follow that route, and that's why the PAS was sort of set up. So I do think it's a project of us working together, but it's not us wanting this information, or it shouldn't be just that. It should be that we all believe that it's right, that as part of this hobby, that these objects can contribute to that sort of greater knowledge. And and detectorists do love sharing that knowledge mostly, don't they? Even at clubs or whatever, they're showing each other what they've found and talking about their discoveries. So that's kind of part of the hobby anyway, isn't it? To share knowledge about what you've discovered. The point is just pooling that information together, so it's not all piecemeal all over the place, that it kind of is in one place that people can have access to it. I'm now working, I'm working on a project that we've got funding for at the University of Reading, to do a massive kind of project looking at the medieval ritual landscape. This has been funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council, and it's going to be the first major study looking at medieval data to understand kind of how people kind of religious belief, I suppose, or religious worship in the medieval period, using the finds at the heart of it as the finds made by detectorists. We're going to use archaeological data as well alongside that, but this project would be impossible without the objects that people, detectorists are finding, and that's the basis of it, really. So it's kind of we think it's going to completely transform our knowledge of how everyday people engaged with religious belief. So it's not about the church imposing things on people. It's about what they did themselves to kind of worship God and how that was part of their individual lives. And we're using detector finds as the basis for understanding that.
Thank you. Got any more questions, Dave? I've got a couple.
No, over to you, young man.
Someone messaged me through our website, Stephen. He didn't put his surname, and it was a question, not so much. Well, it is related to the Portable Antiquities Scheme. He found treasure, and it was declared a treasure. He registered it with his flow, and now it's been disclaimed, and he's got it back. The farmers said he can keep it. He doesn't want any monetary value for it, and Stephen would like to give it to the museum to display in his local area. However, he's concerned that if he asks for it back after a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, could he ask for it back?
Yeah, well, essentially, it's down to the local museum whether they want to, have it on loan.
It might be a 1978 baked bean tin. You never know.
It happens, I think, quite regularly. I don't know if you know, but because Annie Byard, you mentioned, was on one of your shows. She did a really nice exhibition at Oxfordshire Museum Service when we were celebrating 20 years of the Treasure Act, where she asked lots of finders she just basically asked to borrow finders' collections to put on display. So they weren't part of the museum collection. It was just to celebrate the fact that people were discovering these objects. Some of the objects were treasure finds that had been acquired by museums. I think that's a nice thing, actually, that the finder likes the idea that the museum will display that object. It's obviously down to them whether they've got the space, the resources, or whatever to do that, and how they might do that. Some museums tend not to display other people's things, contrary to what I was saying, because they then have a sort of liability sort of problem. I guess if they've got things on display that are theirs, then that's their sort of problem. But obviously, if they put something on display and it was, broken into or stolen and something, then they've got another issue to deal with, haven't they? So there's that side of it, but generally speaking, I think that's not impossible. I mean, I remember when I was Kent Fines Liaison Officer, we had relationships between the local clubs and certain local clubs and the museums, where they would have like a temporary display where they'd put their fines on display, and then they would rotate them sort of like the next month or something like that.
That's a good idea.
That's exactly what we've got with Congleton Museum, Tempest, the group I'm in. Mainly Dave Clark and Graham Withers. Their fines are on display and rotated there quite regularly.
Yeah, I think it's a nice thing to do, isn't it? Really,
because it gives everybody something new to. I mean, I go to the museum on a regular basis, so it's nice to go in there and see things changing instead of one continuous exhibition.
Yeah, and of course, there's a lot of detector fines that museums won't want to acquire themselves, necessarily. So it gives an opportunity, for that to happen, for them to go on display for short periods of time. I mean, I know that loads of finders love the idea of their object being on display in the museum. It's a thing that we've done a lot of filming for quite a few television programs, and when as part of that, when people have said, the British Museum's acquired it or another museum's acquired it, they just kind of love the idea that this object's on display and other people can go and see their find on show. So I think there's a lot more that museums can do perhaps in that side of things, in terms of the kind of recognition of detectorists contributing to the museum collections. And that's certainly something we're looking at the British Museum. How do we acknowledge the contribution that detectorists are making? Obviously, most of the fines reported through the Portable Antiquities Scheme go back to the finders. We're just recording them, and they go back. The treasure fines, may be acquired by museums, but they tend to be acquired by local museums. So there's a few things, the British Museum's, acquired, but it's a small percentage of the mass, really.
Yeah, I think it's Philip Wills has just put in the chat, badge of honour to have something on display in a museum, even for a short while. And he's right, because if you had a club, like the club or one of the clubs I'm in, there's like 250 members. Someone finds something in the club and brings it to the display cabinet for the evening. Everyone wants to see it because they know Dave or Jeff who found it, and they know the history behind it. It's a bit like when your kids at school produce a school calendar. It's a kind of nice thing, but your son's painting's in that, so you buy it. So if you have detectorist finds in a museum, the people in the club will go to the museum, their friends and family potentially will go to the museum, and that's more traffic through the museum. That's more Colchester Museum pencil sharpeners being sold, donations. Do you know what I mean? It's getting people into museums, because I think probably through COVID, when they were shut down, they may have obviously lost an income, but museums are such good places to go to. Where I live in Chelmsford. Chelmsford and Essex Museum has just had huge amount of work done, and it's fantastic there now, and it's free to enter. And it's fantastic. I don't know if you've been there recently, Michael.
Not recently, no.
So it's got interactive stuff. It's got loads of things for pressing buttons and sound effects, and it's history of the local area. And there are detector finds in there. And there was a hoard found, Great Lees. I think it was 14 gold status or something, but a few years ago. But it gets people into museums, and I think if you had more detectorist finds in museums, like Dave said, and you said, it's turning things around. So, it's also encouraging people to look
at. While I was on holiday in Turkey this year, Adrian, in Fethiye, I was video calling you to show you the metal detector. Well, not the metal, the coin hoards. A metal detectorist gravitates themselves to the metallic finds in any museum. So it's we want to see what's what. We want to see if it's something similar to what we've got. We want to see what someone else has found.
Support your local museum. Need to push that
absolutely.
More. Actually, we should do a live show from a museum, Dave. Actually,
I will go and see Ian and see if we can do one from the Congleton Museum. I'm sure he'll be accommodating.
Even though I'm 400 odd miles away from you, but big detecting show night in the museum. Yeah, I'd love to spend the night in the museum. God, it'd be so cool.
Yeah, but you think things are going to come alive and you're going to go round on horseback with Robin Williams and
maybe I've drunk too much red wine again. But sorry, I was just seeing if anyone else has got any questions in the chat. A lot of people saying about great seeing stuff in the museum. Stephen, never worry about contacting your flow. They are busy, but get back to you eventually. At least I do. No wrong. Yeah, I don't think we've got any. There was
night at the museum. What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah. Back. Yeah, I think that's good. No, anyone got any questions? We have a slight delay, don't we, Dave, on when we speak?
That's just me and you. I kind of just say, Adrian, and I'm sure all the viewers tonight will also agree with us how well behaved and refined we are, and not lowering the tone like we sometimes do.
I think I don't really want to dwell on it much, Michael, but there's been some press about things going missing and police getting involved. But if you look at the percentage of fines that have been submitted based on the issues that have arisen from people losing things and et cetera, it's very low. And you will get someone who isn't doing things properly. Like in the world of detecting, we all know it. There are people who don't abide by the rules, and there are people, but in regard to that, I understand that the treasure process is being looked at the moment. Have you got anything you can say on that for next year?
On the treasure process itself, or the sort of lost. Well, in terms of lost finds, like you said, I mean, it's very, very rare that things sort of go.
Yeah,
go missing. In that, there's a particular case, obviously, where the police has now, thankfully, it seems, recovered perhaps all of the objects that were stolen, and they've arrested someone in relation to that. I mean, obviously I can't speak, I know a lot about that case, but I can't speak about it because it's obviously under police investigation. I don't want to say anything that kind of prejudices that. I mean, from my perspective, the two most important things were the fines were recovered and that whoever's responsible is kind of brought to justice for that. I mean, that's obviously the two things, because all of us who work with fines take a lot of care in working with them, and I don't want it to be thought that fines liaison officers across the country are careless with objects, because they certainly not. They care a lot about these objects as much as the detectives who find them do. We're in it essentially because we love history, aren't we? That's the basis of it. In terms of the kind of reform of the treasure laws, I mean, the Department for Culture essentially is doing two main things, I suppose. One is updating the code of practice. The last time that was done was in 2003, when the PAS was sort of in its infancy, I suppose. It's the first time it started to go kind of national. And the code of practice doesn't really reflect what sort of happens in reality. So they want to kind of tighten it up. I mean, the positive things is they want to have clear timelines for when things are supposed to happen. At the moment in the current code, it suggests that the treasure process is supposed to finish within about a year, but it's not really detailed how long a coroner's got to do with that and how long the museum has got to raise money and all of that sort of stuff. So they want to make that a bit clearer, and obviously that will go alongside our sort of treasure tracking system in terms of tightening up those timescales and keeping people a bit more kind of informed as we go along. But obviously what people really focus on is how the law is going to change in terms of what is treasure. And the main thing that the government is looking to do is introduce a new significance-based criteria. And it would be really, really high level. But we all know that there are those finds that have been discovered in relatively recent years, like the Crosby Garrett helmet, the Rydale hoard that was eventually acquired by the Yorkshire Museum Trust, where there's no legal requirement for finders to report them. And sometimes, for different reasons, they can end up, outside a public collection. So I think we all know that there's these certain objects that, I mean, I'm sure there's some people who don't agree with me completely on this, but I think most of us will know that there's certain objects where they really should be in a museum for everyone to be able to see and enjoy. And the legislation is designed to ensure, or they will ensure, that those sort of high-level objects that are actually outside the scope of the Act at the moment. So they're not, essentially, we're talking about things that are not gold and silver, but are pretty amazing in their own right, would sort of be treasure. And I think I think, we've still got to work out exactly how that sort of happens in practice, and the DCMS is going to have consultation with finders and all sorts of different people about that. But like I said, it's going to be a very small number of objects a year probably, and it's going to be the things that really, it's almost the finders will know as much as us that, this is something that is pretty amazing that they've discovered and should be in a public collection.
I suppose the only concern is the high level description and the finder aware that is a high level product.
Yeah.
And so if I'm detecting and I find something that is associated with that, how am I going to know that? And if I don't know that, what are the consequences? And if the consequences are a fine or potential imprisonment or whatever, is that not going to make me want to go to my flow, who's already busy, just to cover my own back? Do you see where I'm coming from?
I mean, I think it's in some ways that you could argue it's no different to how the process is now, because obviously people find things and they don't realise they're treasure. So, for example, when the Ringlemere Cup was found, this Bronze Age gold vessel, the finder, when he first dug it out of the ground, he thought it was just some sort of Victorian kind of thing. He took it home, looked in his history books and thought, oh my God, I found a Bronze Age cup of which only one other has been found in the country. Then he suddenly realized, oh my gosh, this is an amazing archaeological find and I've got to kind of tell someone about it.
Emptied his wine out at that point.
Yeah, it might be, of course, that someone find something and then they go to their local metal detecting club and somebody thinks, oh my gosh, I think you found something quite interesting here. Or it might be that they go to their local finds liaison officer. It could be that they even go to a dealer and say, look, I'm looking to sell this object. And they think, oh my gosh, I've never seen anything like this. I think this might kind of fall under this definition. So you can see all of those scenarios. And like I said before, in terms of the treasure legislation, it's designed to encourage people to do the right thing rather than prosecute people for doing things by accident. So I don't think unless somebody basically said, was given that advice that they should report their subject and they kind of completely ignored it. I think the chances of anybody being sort of prosecuted is quite small. It would be that they say, look, you realise this is treasure, you need to put it through the process. Okay, I'll do that then, sort of thing. So I think that's sort of, what would happen in practice.
It's very funny because I don't know if you've watched it, this year's Christmas or last year's Christmas Detectorists.
Yeah, I did. I watched it, and in fact, I saw the script before it went out.
Well, I'm wondering if you wrote it, because that bit where that cup's thrown away and ends up in the local village hall sort of jumble box. I just think there's a moral to that story. If you're not aware, don't hide it. Don't take it home. Try and clean it and snap it up. Just leave it.
Or as what it says in the Archaeology and Metal Detecting magazine advert: all that glitters is not gold.
No. Yes, exactly. So that cup is like the way they're throwing it to each other and catching it. I was just like, oh my Lord, and it must happen. It must happen. But there was a very interesting moral in that episode, I thought, and it was very well done by Mackenzie Crook and the team. But yeah, it was very interesting.
Yeah, I really enjoyed watching it, and I enjoy watching the Detectorists. And the first time I saw the show, when it first came out, I was thinking, because Mackenzie did actually come and see us in the PAS when he, right at the beginning of the kind of, when he was thinking about this program, he didn't really let on anything. He just wanted to talk to us, and I think he was just saying, "Well, what are these archaeologists at the British Museum like, or something like that?" I don't know. And they did a Christmas special a few years ago as well at the British Museum, and I'm actually an extra in that. Although you won't notice me at all, I was just kind of looking around the museum as a visitor.
Oh wow!
Yeah, but it was quite good fun.
But they could have actually had you on screen instead of the actor who was talking to him.
I was photogenic enough, was I? So, yeah.
I've got one more question I want to ask, because we've got about 4 or 5 minutes left of this show. It's a really good question from Paul B again. Does Professor Lewis get any sense that more research papers are generated originating from purely metal detecting finds? Any idea of the increase compared to before the creation of the PAS?
I don't have actual numbers, but I know it's absolutely significant. So, I mean, like I said, I suppose earlier in our conversation, I don't think anyone doing any kind of research on finds now, and also all landscape archaeology, can really ignore the kind of data that's been generated through sort of metal detecting. I mean, I do quite a lot of research myself, you know, using Portable Antiquities Scheme and metal detected finds. I mean, you know, stuff that kind of pops up in archaeological excavations. Okay, there's certain objects that always seem to be found in archaeological excavations, but in terms of, you know, any kind of work that you're looking at the relationship between different object types, and you know the landscapes that they're from, you just got to use PAS stroke, you know, metal detecting data. I mean, you've just got to use it because it provides a high level of new evidence. I mean, it's not the case that detector finds are better than the archaeological data. We're talking about two very different things. We're talking about archaeologists digging very specific sites, normally in urban areas, with their own sort of archaeology, and metal detectorists kind of quite randomly, you know, going around the country finding things that we would never ever discover through archaeology. It's not the way that archaeologists work, is it? Going across the landscape saying, oh, it looks like an ice field, I'll dig a trench across it and see what I might find. I mean, it's a completely different mechanism of looking for things. But if you don't record that stuff, then you just lose that information completely. So the way I see it is they're completely complementary but different techniques of exploring the landscape. And you need to use them together to understand the kind of history and archaeology. And that's why it's so important that detectorists do record their finds, because they add to that picture. I mean, they might think, oh, it's another, you know, jeton or another one of these or another one of those. But, you know, unless we can piece them all together, it's difficult. I mean, essentially, when we're looking, you know, we're doing archaeology, it's like we've got a jigsaw puzzle where we've got 3 of the pieces left, and we're trying to work out what the picture is based on these 3 pieces. The detectorist might bring another 5 or 6 pieces to that jigsaw puzzle. So it's still pretty, you know, unclear about what was going on in the past. But, you know, the more bits that we have, the more information and the better understanding we'll have of what's been going on. So, you know, as you can probably tell, I'm a big advocate of, you know, what I'd call responsible metal detecting, by which I mean, you know, recording your finds, because I think metal detecting does make a really positive contribution. Certainly, you know, when detecting happens on ploughed soil, because those objects are going to get destroyed anyway, let's face it, aren't they, by ploughing and agriculture, and the kind of materials, you know, that are put onto the soil as well. So unless people are recovering those objects and recording them, then that information is just going to vanish anyway. So, you know, it's not archaeology, it's not metal detecting, sorry, that's doing the damage. It's agriculture that is. And of course, we all need agriculture because we have to eat, don't we? So it's you know, it's a necessary evil, I suppose, eating, but it's not that kind of it's not the metal detecting that is the problem. It's whether people are recording their finds that is the issue, and the capacity for us to record them. So that's why it's important for us to work together, I think, ensuring everything is possible.
Forging good relationships between liaison officers and detectorists. That's what it's all about.
Absolutely. Well, anybody who, there's a lot of other questions that we've not been able to get round to, sadly. We have ran out of time. But if you do want to communicate any of them questions, get in contact with your local finds liaison officer. If you go to finds.org.uk, you'll find a list of finds liaison officers on there with your particular area.
Be nice to them.
Be nice to them. They've got a very difficult job, and you can obviously discuss anything you'd like to know with them. Andy Agate, who's been watching the show tonight, he's been quite vocal throughout, talking and answering questions. We do appreciate that, Andy. Thank you very much. I know Teresa Gilmore. Is that the right? That's the right name, isn't it? It is Teresa Gilmore, Staffordshire FLO. She's been very helpful behind the scenes with Shane over the past couple of months, and even done part of the video for us at Christmas. So please play nice and get in contact with them with any other information you need. Michael, is there anything else you'd like to add before we go?
No, not really. Apart from, you know, very much thanking you for allowing me to come on. I mean, obviously, I'll be very happy to come another time. And obviously, if people want to contact me directly as well, they can do. My contacts are on the same page as the finds liaison officers. at the bottom, tucked away, of course. But if you want to contact me, you're quite welcome to. If there's anybody's got any concerns or ideas or anything like that, please do. I'm very happy to hear from people directly as well. But otherwise, obviously, fines liaison officers are on the ground. They're the people doing the kind of hard work of recording the fines. So do speak to them as well.
Brilliant. Well, I'll be contacting you to obviously tell you what I was on about earlier. But also, Michael, if there's anything else you want to come on the show in the future to discuss, let us know. Is any information you want disseminating? I'll let you know our social media and website visit hits, so you can get an idea of the coverage that we have on a whole. And I'm sure you'll find that's quite interesting as well, to get any information that you personally want to get out to the metal detecting or archaeological community. And don't forget, it's not just metal detecting fines that you can also report to the fines liaison officers. If you feel walking and you find a arrow-shaped bit of stone, it potentially could be an arrowhead, you can obviously contact them with things like that, because it's not just metallic fines that they're interested in.
Or stuff in your nan's biscuit tin.
Or stuff in your nan's biscuit
that you know
tin.
where it's come from.
We need to know where it comes from.
Not from Jumble Cell 1977.
Well, my nan's biscuit tin actually come from Lewis's in Ellesmere Port years ago, so I know where that's come from.
Right.
I'm just joking.
Just one quick question. Michael, have you or would you go metal detecting?
Well, I sort of knew you might ask me this actually, or thought because most detectives do. When I was fines liaison officer at Kent, we did this project on National Trust property, which doesn't normally allow metal detecting, but we had permission to do a survey there, metal detecting survey, and then I had a bit of a go just to see what it was sort of like. Because I was egged on by all the detectives there, come on, see, you have to have a go with this and see what you do. I mean, I didn't do it for very long, and I didn't find anything, which I was probably quite relieved for, because I think at least it would have been gone into the kind of sort of collection of objects that we were, contributing to. But yeah, I mean, I can see why there's a sort of buzz, of course, of people, wanting to go out there. And there's obviously lots of reasons that people do metal detecting, but the idea of getting out there in the country and away from it all is great. I mean, I've been on the foreshore in London, for example, as well. And, it's amazing there when you're kind of in the middle of the city of London and it's all sort of quiet, down on the foreshore. No one's really down there. So I've had a go. I mean, obviously, with my job, I'm probably busy enough, and I've got other hobbies. So, like you say, all British people have a hobby. I've got a hobby it's not relating to archaeology or metal detecting at all, which I quite like. So, so I had a go, put it that way.
Well, if ever you're in Essex and you're stuck for time and you've got a bit, give me a shout and I'll take you out, because metal detectors now have moved on a long way. And if you've got an iPhone or an iMac or anything modern day technology, it's as simple as now. It's lovely. There's so much nicer, lovely display screens, lightweight.
I couldn't believe how heavy they were. I was like, oh my gosh, this is a
bit. They're so light.
Not anymore.
They're so light now. They're
all composite materials.
It's like walking a field with a walking pole, like you buy at Decathlon, but not holding it like that. So, and the tones are nicer now. They're more fluted,
polyphonic,
as opposed to, So, and the headsets. But so if ever you're down my way, I've got some nice permissions in Essex. So lovely countryside and things.
And then Michael hits the hoard that you've been after for years. And devastated.
All I'm thinking is everything I dig, I just go, Michael, what's this?
I think you have to look in the book.
Yeah, well, I mean, I spend all day detecting, and then when I get home, I sit there with the books, looking at everything. And my poor wife. Oh, when are you going? Oh, I leave about 8 in the morning. We'll be home about 2. Get home at 5, and then you get in and look at all your finds in the book. So it's probably 7, 8 o'clock. Ruin the dining room table and the kitchen sink. But anyway, we move on. But thank you very much, Michael, for coming on tonight. It's been really nice, Jane.
And before we go, thank you to everybody who took part in our bit of a vote last night. What we thought would be 10 or 20 people actually turned into several hundred people actually voting on what the new logo would be. Adrian designed about 6 or 7 logos. We whittled it down to 5, And then eventually we've whittled it down to the final one, which was a massive 38% of the votes. Next week's show, we have from the USA and Mr. Tim Draper. Have a look for Uncharted Expedition TV show, and you'll find out all about next week's guest. And we look forward greatly. Again, Michael, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you tonight. And don't forget, you can communicate with me or Adrian at Dave or Adrian at BigDetectiveShow.com.
Or Treasure Hunting Magazine.
Or Archaeology Mag, or ArkMD Mag. Thank you again, Michael, and we will see you all next week. Good night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Michael.
Bye.